When Christmas comes around, some weird stories from when we were kids always pop back into our heads. In the 60s and 70s, there was a toy that sold like crazy, caused serious trouble, and disappeared from the shelves after a recall and a government crackdown. Today, I'm opening up that old trunk and showing you a list of 22 vintage toys. Number 15 is jaw-dropping, and there are collectors in the US paying more than $5,000 for it at auction. Evel Knievel stunt cycle. Back in the 70s, when Evel kept showing up on TV jumping over buses and canyons, this toy motorcycle was the closest we could get to being him. Sold in every department store you could think of, it was a guaranteed Christmas or birthday gift. You'd snap the figure into place, crank the launcher like you were firing up a Harley, and suddenly it was showtime in the living room. The rug turned into a racetrack, books became lined-up buses, the couch was a packed grandstand. The bike would take off, sometimes landing the perfect jump, sometimes crashing all over the asphalt between the chairs, and everyone would laugh. By the end of the day, the house was a mess, but the feeling was always the same. For a few minutes, that chunk of plastic made you feel like a real daredevil. Steve Austin action figure, the $6 Million Man. In the 70s, long before video games and cell phones, this Kenner figure became the dream toy for a lot of boys. It came with the red jumpsuit, inspired by the TV series with Lee Majors, where astronaut Steve Austin was rebuilt with bionic technology after an accident. Just taking it out of the box already felt like holding a special piece of equipment, something a government agent would use, not a simple store-shelf toy. The most memorable detail was the bionic eye. By pressing your face against the back of his head, you could peek through the viewer and see the room like you had a tiny secret periscope. His right arm had a rubber skin that hid the circuits and let him lift weights, powered by a mechanism connected to the head. Many versions even came with an engine block to simulate strength tests. For a kid back then, every couch turned into an OSI base, every hallway looked like a mission set, and Steve Austin was always on duty, ready for another round of bionic adventures. Even today, lots of people over 50 remember the show's slow-motion sound and can recognize the figure from far away. In the hands of an ordinary kid, it made everyday life feel like a Friday night TV episode. World's greatest superheroes. When Mego dove headfirst into this line in the early 70s, it changed the way an entire generation played. The company, founded in the 50s in New York, used to survive on cheap toys you'd find in a dollar store until the owner's son took over as president and spotted a new opportunity. Use the same 8-inch plastic body and just swap out the head, clothes, and accessories. In 1972 came the contracts that today seem almost unreal. In one single move, they got the rights to both DC and Marvel to make posable action figures with fabric outfits, sold under the World's Greatest Superheroes label. Right out of the gate came Batman, Robin, Aquaman, and Superman. A little later, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Tarzan joined the line. And suddenly supermarket shelves and mail-order catalogs turned into a parade of heroes that fit in any kid's hand. For kids growing up in the US at that time, it was almost a rule to have at least one of them tossed somewhere on the living room carpet near the tube TV while Saturday morning cartoons were on. The fun was mixing everything the comics never allowed, putting Spidey side by side with Superman, making up fights between Batman and Captain America, using the same Batmobile in half a dozen different stories. Mego didn't just ride the wave. It helped define the size, the look, and the whole way of playing with superhero figures that a lot of people, now past 50, still recognize the moment they crack open an old box in the basement. Etch a Sketch. Before it became an American store icon, it was born in a factory shed near Paris, in the hands of André Cassagnès, an electrician who worked with aluminum powder and light switch plates. One day he realized you could draw by scraping the powder trapped behind a sheet of glass. From that insight came the idea of a screen that erased when you shook it, shown at fairs in Europe under the name L'écran magique. At first, almost no one wanted to back the project. The big brands looked at it, did the math, and walked away. Only later did the small Ohio art company agree to pay $25,000 for the license and invest heavily in American TV ads, targeting Christmas of 1960, right in the middle of the baby boom. The trick behind that red rectangle was simple and straight to the point. Two knobs controlling a hidden stylus that scraped the powder and made straight lines up and down and side to side, almost like driving a car on a narrow road. For a lot of kids in the US, it was their first contact with something close to a personal screen. Mess up, shake it, start over, and stay there for hours in a pre-video game world, sitting in the living room while their parents watched the evening news. G.I. Joe with Kung Fu grip. In the late 60s and early 70s, just about every kid in the United States already knew Hasbro's G.I. Joe, the 12-inch soldier launched in 1964 that became the standard action figure for boys. In 1974, when the company put the new rubber hands on store shelves, nicknamed the Kung Fu grip, it was like swapping an old car for a newer model. The figure was the same, but the way you played leveled up. Now the fingers opened and closed and could hold a rope, a weapon, a motorcycle handlebar, or whatever else you threw at it, just like the commercials promised. For kids who grew up in the middle of the Cold War, watching military news and martial arts movies on TV, it made perfect sense to have a hero who looked like a soldier but had fighter's hands. The fun became testing how long Joe could hang from chairs, shelves, doorknobs. Every house turned into a proving ground, and every G.I. Joe got his own mission just because of those new hands that finally kept up with their owner's imagination. Baby Alive. In the 70s, when TV was still a novelty in a lot of American homes, this doll became a craze. Released by Kenner in 1973, the idea was simple. Let kids practice taking care of a real baby. It came with packets of powdered food to mix with water, a bottle, a plastic diaper, and a special spoon. The child would put the spoon in the doll's mouth, press the lever on her back, and watch the mouth move while the baby food went down through the body and ended up in the diaper. For kids used to much simpler toys, it felt like technology from another world. A lot of girls spent entire afternoons feeding her, giving her water, and changing her diaper, while their parents watched from a distance, half proud, half worried about the mess in the living room. At Christmas, finding a baby alive on a department store shelf could feel like a battle. Ads running in every commercial break, gift lists repeating the same request, and kids swearing that was the present of their dreams. Green Machine. In the 70s, when kids were getting too big for the big wheel, this big green beast became the dream ride in American suburbia. Marx released it targeting boys ages 8 to 12, selling the idea of a plastic hot rod, cheap enough for dad, cool enough to earn street status. Instead of handlebars, it had two levers connected to the rear axle. All you had to do was pedal hard, pull one lever back, push the other forward, and the thing would spin 180 degrees right in the middle of the sidewalk. The bucket seat kept everyone riding just inches from the ground, giving that improvised race car feeling between the garage and the end of the block. Plenty of people now over 50 still remember the thrill of those tight turns, the loud clack of the wheels on the concrete, and that old certainty that for a few minutes, the whole street was your own personal racetrack. Football 2, Mattel Electronics, handheld football game. In the late 70s, before cell phones and pocket video games, this little LED device became a craze among kids. Mattel released Football 2 in 1978, with those red dots running across a field that fit in the palm of your hand, all powered by a 9-volt battery. Each light represented a player, a down, a gain of yards. There were no graphics at all, but your imagination did the rest. We learned to read the field like it was a Sunday broadcast. Pick the right run, spot the gap in the defense, picture the crowd noise. Tons of people carried the game to school, on the bus, during work breaks, always trying to beat their own record or a friend's. That little gadget was the first time many of us felt what it was like to have a computer of our own in our pocket, running an entire football team. And on top of that, it was a simple way to pass the time between one responsibility and the next. Simon. In the late 70s, right in the era of the first video games, this plastic disc with 4 colored panels showed up looking like it came from the future. Created by Ralph Baer and Howard Morrison for Milton Bradley in 1978, Simon flashed lights and played sounds like a drill sergeant barking orders. Repeat it if you dare. The rule was simple, but it stuck. The sequence started short, got longer and longer, and one wrong move made the whole thing buzz and end your round. A lot of people first played Simon at a birthday party, in a suburban basement, or on the kitchen table with dying batteries. Parents, kids, and even grandparents took turns, each one swearing they had the best memory. For many people now over 50, remembering Simon is remembering when high-tech fit in a toy that lived on top of the fridge. Lite-brite. Created by Hasbro back in 1967, it was basically a light-up box with tiny holes and a bunch of bright plastic pegs. We'd turn off the living room lights, switch it on, and start building pictures on the black paper. Race cars, team helmets, TV logos, whatever came to mind. There were ready-made templates with famous characters, but for a lot of kids the fun was ignoring the paper and doing it their own way. The pegs always ended up scattered across the carpet, turning into traps for anyone walking around barefoot in the middle of the night. Even so, after finishing a panel, plenty of us would take it all apart without hesitation. Part of the fun was going back to that dark screen and feeling like you could light up a whole new picture from scratch. Today, a lot of people who grew up with it remember the simple glow of that time, before video games were in every corner of the house. Hot Wheels. In the late 60s, when Detroit was still called Motor City, a guy named Elliot Handler looked at toy store shelves and saw a clear gap. Boys didn't have anything as iconic as Barbie, created by his wife Ruth. In 1968, he bet on mini cars that looked like the muscle cars filling American streets. Only pocket-sized and with one detail that made all the difference. Thin wheels with metal axles, built to roll smoother and faster than Matchbox cars. Mattel brought in designers from the auto industry, like Harry Bentley Bradley, and kicked things off with a lineup of 16 models, all with metallic paint and names that sounded like shop talk. The orange tracks came into play, and suddenly any hallway became a living room racetrack. Within a few years, dads, kids, and even grandpas were competing to see who could build the best circuit, and the brand became part of the childhood memories of several generations. Lego. Back in the 60s, when fast toy cars and slot car tracks were all the rage, a different kind of toy showed up from Denmark with a simple idea: play well. They were plastic bricks that snapped together tightly, created in the late 40s, and soon they took over kitchen tables, bedrooms, and basements. Instead of just racing, you could build a garage, a gas station, a building, an entire city. Every box you opened turned into a new project, one of those where Dad started just to help and ended up on the floor next to the kids, trying to figure out what the next build of the day would be, and realizing those bricks held your attention more than any race ever could. Stretch Armstrong. Released by Kenner in 1976, this blonde, muscle-bound guy in dark trunks showed up right when toys were starting to feel like science experiments you could do at home. He wasn't just another plastic figure. He was filled with a thick corn syrup gel made to stretch and then slowly snap back into place, almost like a mini circus trick. The commercials swore you could pull him out to nearly 5 feet without breaking him, and that was basically an open invitation for living room chaos. Middle-class parents, many of them still coming out of the worries of Vietnam and the oil crisis, watched their kids test every limit, tying the doll to chairs, doors, doorknobs. There was always that one engineer in the group, the kid who had to know what was inside and ended up poking a hole in Stretch. When the syrup leaked and stuck to the carpet, the couch, and socks, the experiment turned into a quick lesson. Some 70s toys could survive almost anything, except too much curiosity. Atari 2600. Picture yourself back in the early 80s, sitting in the living room with the tube TV hooked up to a video game console that looked like a wooden radio, one of the first systems that really made it into people's homes. Suddenly, instead of just 3 TV channels, little square shapes start jumping around on the screen. It's Mario Bros. On the Atari version. Kind of choppy, a bit like Donkey Kong, but back then, it felt like pure magic. With a simple joystick and one red button, we'd spend hours trying to beat our own high scores, calling over friends from the block, forming a line on the couch or down in the basement. Every new cartridge felt like an event, almost like someone getting a new phone today. And even when the game froze, the sound glitched, or the picture went all wonky, nobody thought about returning it or complaining. We'd laugh, joke about the console, hit reset, and get ready for another best of 3 that always turned into best of 10, stretching late into the night. Star Wars action figures and the Millennium Falcon. In 1977, when the movie blew up in theaters, Kenner put those 3.75-inch figures on store shelves, small enough to fit in any kid's hand. If you were a boy in the US back then, you remember it well. Suddenly, the kitchen table and the living room carpet turned into battle scenes. Instead of toy cars or generic soldiers, you had Luke, Leia, Han, Vader, and the rest, repeating lines that were still echoing from the screen. Every new figure that showed up in the store expanded the cast and stretched the story a little more. The pieces were simple, with only a few points of articulation, but nobody cared. What mattered was having the character right there. To keep the craze going at Christmas, Kenner created the Early Bird Certificate, basically a toy voucher that promised to mail the first 4 figures months later, kind of like the first pre-order in toy history. Today, one of those kits can easily go for over $4,000 if it's intact. The Millennium Falcon, released in 1979, mixed spaceship and playset. It had a secret compartment, a game table, a rotating cannon, a boarding ramp, and battle sounds. Anyone who had one at home felt like they owned their own galaxy. Hungry, Hungry Hippos. It showed up in the late 70s when Milton Bradley, later bought by Hasbro, filled store shelves with this loud family game. 4 plastic hippos surround the board, and each player grabs their lever, ready to chomp marbles like they're in a mini tournament on the living room table or in the basement with orange carpet. The official rule is simple: grab as many marbles as you can. In practice, it turned into a serious showdown between cousins, parents, and neighbors, with bets on who would wash the dishes or pay for the pizza. The sound of those levers echoed through the whole house, mixed with the jingle from the commercial stuck in your head and the smell of Sunday dinner. A lot of people now over 50 remember this game as the moment when making a mess was allowed, and nobody touched the TV remote until the last marble was gone. Operation was always more than just a board game on the shelf. It was almost a living room ritual. Back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people first learned what a steady hand was right there. Saturday night, family around the table, everyone waiting for their turn to face the red-nosed patient. The challenge seemed silly, but the moment those tweezers got close to the metal, your heart started racing. When that cursed nose buzzed, it brought a mix of embarrassment and everyone cracking up. And every group had that calm person who pulled the pieces out like they'd been on duty for decades. In the end, the game showed who could handle pressure, long before computers, cell phones, and all these screens took over everything. For a lot of people, remembering that board is almost hearing the buzz echo in the room all over again. Weebles. Back in the 70s, when Play School put these little figures on the market, the idea was simple and kind of genius. Lots of people now over 50 remember them well. Egg-shaped characters with a weighted bottom made to pop back up every time. The TV ads push the jingle, "Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down," while kids were glued to cartoons and shows like Romper Room. They didn't have arms or legs, but they came with a treehouse, car, trailer, boat, and playground, all in that hard plastic you'd see in a Sears holiday catalog. For many families, it was the first time they saw this idea of falling, wobbling, but getting back up again. A cheap, tough, almost indestructible toy that now shows up in online auctions and forgotten basement boxes, bringing back a whole chunk of American childhood. Tin Can Alley. On those late Sunday afternoons, this thing felt like it came straight out of a cheap small-town carnival. You'd set up the little plastic wall, stack the shiny cans on top, and grab the light beam pistol, just like the ones that started showing up on store shelves in the 70s, with a sensor under each can. One pull of the trigger and the infrared beam shot right at the target. If you hit it, the can popped off the base with a sound that felt like a church fair. The living room, with carpet and a tube TV in the background, turned into an improvised shooting booth. The guys made up rules. Best out of 10, Sunday championship. Whoever missed had to fetch the batteries. Brothers, cousins, neighbors, everyone wanted to test their aim, because it was the kind of toy that let grown-ups turn into kids again for a few minutes. And as long as the batteries held out, nobody thought about stopping. When the power finally died, you'd hear that collective sigh, and someone would already be adding another pack of AA batteries to the shopping list. Rock'em Sock'em Robots. Released by Marx in 1964, this little boxing ring became a symbol of a time when fun at home meant the kitchen table, not a glowing screen. Two robots, Red Rocker and Blue Bomber, were locked into the base, each connected to its own mechanical controller. The goal was simple and straight to the point. The kind of thing the baby boomer generation loved. Hit the opponent's jaw until the head popped up. The idea came from an earlier boxing toy with human fighters, but after the death of boxer Davy Moore, the creators swapped the fighters for robots to lighten the violent tone. In the late afternoons, parents and kids took turns at the tiny toy ring, arguing over who cheated on a punch and demanding a rematch. Within a few years, Rock'em Sock'em Robots were in TV commercials, Christmas lists, and later even in movies like Toy Story 2, becoming an instant childhood reference for anyone who grew up in the US in the 60s and 70s. Spirograph. In the mid-60s, British engineer Dennis Fisher took the old idea of drawing gears and put it into a toy box any family could have at home. In 1965, the set showed up at toy fairs in Europe, soon got a Kenner version in the United States, and in 1967 it became Toy of the Year in the UK. In a lot of homes, the routine was simple. The box went onto the kitchen table, someone clipped the plastic ring onto the paper, and the kids started spinning the little wheels with a pen or mechanical pencil. Suddenly perfect circles, waves, and flower shapes appeared, like the lines had jumped onto a track. Without mentioning any formulas, the toy brought ideas like gears, rotation, and repetition into everyday life, right when TV was talking about rockets and computers. For many people now over 50, this was their first real contact with the way math shows up in ordinary things. Tonka trucks. Back in the 1960s, anyone who grew up in the United States remembers those yellow steel trucks scattered around the backyard. The brand was born in the late 1940s in Minnesota, when a small tool company changed direction and started using steel sheets to make toy vehicles that could take real abuse. At Christmas during that decade, a new Tonka meant hours digging in the sand, hauling rocks, and carving little dirt roads behind the house. A dented dump bed, chipped paint, and a bent axle weren't flaws. They were signs of a job well done, almost like a real construction truck. Parents liked them because they knew the toy could be passed from one kid to another, sometimes even to cousins, and still hold up. Over time, Tonkas became a symbol of American post-war childhood. Simple, heavy, straightforward, and found in almost every backyard in the country. In the 1970s, the line grew. Cranes, cement mixers, fire trucks showed up, and a lot of Christmas trees still had a yellow box underneath. Today, many of those models have become collector's items and bring back memories of a time when a backyard, a pile of dirt, and a steel truck were enough to fill an entire day with stories, still talked about to this day.